Welcome to the Food Junkies Podcast. Here, we aim to provide you with the experience, strength, and hope of professionals actively working on the front lines in the field of food addiction. The purpose of our show is to educate you, the listener, and increase overall awareness about food addiction as a disease with abstinence as the solution. Here, we talk about all things recovery. Most importantly, how to thrive rather than just survive. So stay positive, make a change for yourself, tell others about your change, and hopefully the message will spread.
Happy Friday, Food Junkies listeners. Molly here. Today, Clarissa and I interview Melanie Martin. Melanie Martin is a registered nutritional therapist, having studied at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in Richmond, London. The principle around which she was trained is that of functional medicine. Mel looks for the underlying causes of health issues rather than treating symptoms. Those underlying issues could be lifestyle, genetics, diet, existing drug treatments, or a whole host of things. Since she qualified and started practicing more than 10 years ago, Mel has become increasingly curious about psychology as an underlying cause or cofactor, and she studied at the Institute for the Psychology of Eating in Colorado to try to understand more about this area of interest. Why some of us, Mel included, have these lifelong, often secret and shame-filled battles with food choices. Mel has also studied metabolic health extensively and has completed the Nutritional Network Low Carb, High Healthy Fat training for practitioners, as well as many continuing professional development hours. Mel heard Bitten Johnson speak about food addiction in 2021, something she had intuited and had often heard clients allude to. So this was a real missing piece moment for her. She consequently completed Bitten's sugar and holistic medicine addiction training. She most recently completed a 15-week introductory course in counseling psychotherapy, and her next learning and development step as a practitioner is to train professionally as a counselor and/or psychotherapist. Today, Clarissa, Mel, and I talk about the following: Mel's personal and professional journey, what are some of our common hormones such as estrogen and progesterone, and why do they fluctuate? How do hormones like estrogen, progesterone, and cortisol impact our appetite? What can we do? Does she have any suggestions for someone listening today? And she answers our signature question. Welcome, Mel.
Thank you again so much, Mel, for being with us today and the weird time change things between the US and Canada and the UK, because next week your time will change and then we'll be all right again in the world. Oh, goodness. Of scheduling and getting things done, right? Yes. So we always love to start off with like the personal story. So we were wondering if you'd kind of give us, a story. Tell us about your personal and professional journey. Like, why this? How did you get here? And, what do you think we should know?
Okay. So I'm going to actually start in my mid-30s. Okay, so I had two small children and I was really frustrated by, I was, my children were my whole world and I wanted to do everything I could do to help them to be these little healthy, lovely people and, and not grow up with the food issues that I grew up with. And so I started by asking professionals like my midwife and the doctor and everywhere I looked, the information about what a healthy diet is was just the messages were conflicting. They were really confusing and it was really, really frustrating. So around that same sort of time, I found this book called Immunity Foods for Healthy Kids by someone called Lucy Burney. And it was just amazing. And it did the rounds of all my mummy friends, because it was just full of really sensible advice and, real food recipes to cook for the whole family. And I noticed, so I had looked to see where she trained because she was a nutritional therapist. And long story short, I decided I wanted to train. So I started training as a nutritional therapist at the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in Richmond, London. And they used a functional medicine model to teach us about all things health and how to practice as a nutritional therapist. And while I was learning all this stuff, I sit in my lectures and I was outraged so often by how come I had never been told this stuff before. Like, things like I learned about the gut microbiome and immunity and mental health and B vitamins and how it's all interlinked. And so that was that part of the story. And then do a little bit of a back step. Pre-babies, I started out kind of a working life as a dental nurse. And then I worked my way into the pharmaceutical industry and worked in sales there. And while I was there, I was involved in selling a new drug at the time, which was for type 2 diabetes. And I was really struck, as we were talking to diabetic nurses and GPs, I was really struck by how we're like selling this drug for a diet and lifestyle disease that you don't catch. And, you know, everybody, all the medical professionals knew this, but they were having these really big problems trying to, you know, get people to do what they knew they should have to do. It was kind of like knowledge wasn't power. Something was in the way. So that was the beginning of my real curiosity about what is it? What is it that stops us doing that, those things that actually we know when we have the information, we still can't do the stuff, or some of us. So since then, really, my practice has evolved to focus on metabolic health and behavior change, I guess. And what I do now is it's super important for me that I'm meeting my clients where they're at, you know, and the things that I like to do really, really well are, and really focus on are, you know, listening to people, really listening to them. Because very often I notice that that's probably the first time anyone's actually sat down and listened for ages. And isn't there huge power in feeling heard? So, yeah. So that was that. In terms of my own journey, I've had a very up and down relationship with food. I kind of didn't eat at all when I was 18 because, you know, sort of stuff going on in my life. And I'd grown up with a mother who dieted from, well, I never remember a time when she wasn't on a diet. I never remember her talking positively about her body. And then she kind of it was like she sort of switched that focus onto me. As soon as I hit puberty, it was like, I was really hungry. And she used to say things to me like, if you eat like that, then, you know, you might not get fat now, but you'll get fat later. And I grew up with this. And it's just, that's taken me years to get over. So I guess that kind of has influenced, you know, the sorts of people that I'm really passionate about helping now too.
So if I was, you know, a client of yours, I think one of the things I find so often is that we just don't understand enough about the hormones. And so can you explain to our audience, what is estrogen and why is it important to know about this?
Okay, so I'm going to start with what hormones are. Okay. And so hormones are chemical messengers. And what that means is they deliver kind of messages to every single part of our body. There is not one single part of our body that's not affected by these chemical messengers that are hormones. And they exist in a kind of this incredible, I call it a dance, because it's this constantly moving and changing, incredible dance. So I think that's where we need to start. Estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone, estrogen this side of the pond, are sex hormones effectively, and men and women have them, all three of them, but just in different quantities. And then the other thing I want to talk about a lot, and this is balance. Just going to drop that word in there, okay? This whole thing is about balance. And that's something, again, I say on a daily basis, because isn't life, the whole of life is about balance, actually, but specifically with these hormones. So yeah, let's have a quick focus on estrogen. So estrogen actually promotes insulin sensitivity in our bodies. So that's a good thing to kind of remember. And that's where it sort of segues into metabolic health. And it's also involved in where we store our body fat as women when we are in that fertile period of our lives. And there's plentiful estrogen. Our ovaries are producing estrogen. I thought I'd look at symptoms of low estrogen, although I just want to say before that, there's a lot of crossover. One of the things I've noticed is, when you just you do your Google search, it's like, it can get really confusing because then you think, okay, well, that's that symptom and it's the same as low progesterone. And so, yeah, I'm going to go through them, but just let's not get too hung up on them. So low estrogen, symptoms of low estrogen can include things like, bladder infections, low energy, low mood, hot flashes, dryness throughout the whole body, because estrogen is absolutely involved with mucous membranes, but particularly, and this is kind of a perimenopausal and a postmenopausal thing, vaginal dryness in women, which is, something that I'm glad the conversation has got louder about because it's something we need to talk about more. Symptoms of high estrogen include bloating, rapid weight gain, breast tenderness, mood swings, heavy periods, anxiety, depression, migraines, poor sleep. But there's a crossover there between kind of low progesterone and high estrogen. And that's because I think sometimes it's very difficult to be able to pull apart which one's causing which, because the whole thing about estrogen and progesterone, particularly estrogen and progesterone, is they balance each other out, you know? So we can end up with, I think one of the places where we often fall down, and perhaps where people will just go straight to thinking, I need to supplement my estrogen because it's low, or supplement my progesterone because it's low, is that actually what could be happening is that your estrogen is not necessarily high, it's high relative to your progesterone levels. So if you're not ovulating every month, your progesterone levels are going to be, you know, lower than they should be. And that can make your estrogen look higher than it actually is, which is what we term estrogen dominance often. So estrogen dominance is often a result of these anovulatory cycles, which we see in perimenopause and also in PCOS, where the progesterone's not produced because, okay, and I don't know if this is too much information, but I'm fascinated by this because, okay, a little bit of an admission here. I'm a nutritional therapist, been practicing for 12 plus years, right? And I was never really very interested in my cycle. It was like, oh, you know, this thing happens once a month and it's really annoying and awkward. And I'm just really pleased when it's finished. And like, I don't want to track my periods or my, you know, my cycles. But actually, I just want to say it's so important. If you're someone who has any sort of an issue, track your cycle. There's loads of apps and things out there now. So yeah, the progesterone part. Okay. So every month in a menstruating woman, when you're in that kind of fertile place in your month, in your life, hopefully every month, you know, not with everybody, an egg starts to mature in your ovary. And as it's starting to mature, at the same time, it's not just the egg, it's covered in this follicle. It's surrounded by a follicle which matures at the same time. And I kind of see it like, it's a bit like a Scotch egg. Okay. There's the egg in the middle and the follicle around the outside. Yes. And the follicles are really important as well because, you know, that starts to produce estrogen as it's maturing, and that tells the lining of the uterus to start thickening, and it does all sorts of other things. You know, it's kind of a real domino effect with the hormones. And then what happens is mid-cycle, say you have a 28-day cycle, about day 14, you should ovulate. So this luteinizing hormone comes in, and that helps this ovary leave the matured egg, leave your ovary, enter your fallopian tube, and that's where, you know, maybe it'll get fertilized. But the follicle is left behind. That's sort of like the outside of the Scotch egg that stays behind in your ovary. And this is the really amazing thing. It becomes a temporary gland and it produces progesterone. So after day 14, and I'm kind of like, I'm skipping ahead here, guys, I'm really sorry, but day 14, you ovulate, ideally, or mid-cycle. And then about, you know, a few days after that, so progesterone levels will start to increase as soon as you've ovulated. And they peak kind of around day sort of 20 to 24. I mean, again, that varies slightly. But that's where the progesterone comes from. So if you don't ovulate, no progesterone is going to happen from your ovaries. Adrenal glands also produce progesterone. So you're going to have a little kind of base level amount, but you won't get that big spike that we're designed to get. Too much information. Sorry.
No, I think it's so important because I would say, like, how does this affect appetite?
Yeah, great. Thanks, Clarissa. So it affects appetite because the way to think about this is, what is your body trying to do this time of the month? Essentially, this cycle every month is about getting you ready to make a new human life. And when that egg leaves your ovary and enters your fallopian tube, what could be happening is there could be a sperm there ready to fertilize that egg. That becomes an embryo, it moves into your uterus, implants, becomes a baby. The progesterone, part of the progesterone's job is to further thicken the lining of your uterus. So it's really nice and thick and kind of all ready to receive and look after that new life. And there's a lot of energy needed for your body to do this. Kind of, so they reckon, I heard someone talking the other day saying that they think that our metabolic rate increases by up to 10% around that time of our cycle. So our body needs more energy. So progesterone actually decreases insulin sensitivity. It makes us a little bit insulin resistant just for a short period. and fairly moderately every month around that time. Insulin stimulates appetite because it wants us to eat more food. It needs more energy. So let's eat more food.
That makes sense. But I also want to point out, so even if it increases by 10%, we're only talking a few hundred calories. Not that we're into counting calories or anything like that, but I also think especially when we're dealing in the world of addiction, and it can increase these crave rate for this energy dense foods, which typically are the more highly palatable, hyper processed kinds of things, just because we're not out in the wild, seeking out those tubers or whatever it would have been, even like a sweet potato or a yam, so many of us are drawn to the tub of ice cream or the brownies or the cookies. And really what I'm hearing you say, Mel, is yes, there absolutely that influences it and it increases it. But really it's we're talking about adding a sweet potato to your meal each day or doing something that helps to facilitate what the estrogen and progesterone, the dance that they need to have during, these different times within the month. Am I understanding correctly?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, absolutely. And, that's such a good point, Molly, because I think that that's where this whole issue of the fact that we, more and more as human beings, we are living in an environment which is not designed for us. It's just not a healthy place to live as a human being anymore. We have the food industry, my opinion, but, the food industry is purposefully making foods which are addictive, and it's not just my opinion. There's is it Michael Moss's book, the book Hooked? There are some really, really good books out there anyway that really detail exactly what's going on. And so I think very often that the reason that, yes, absolutely addiction is going to, be coming into play there. So if you're somebody who is using an abstinence-based approach to manage your food addiction, then that's going to be a really tough time of the month for you. And maybe just knowing that, maybe just realizing that it's not your imagination. Actually, there is something happening in your body. It's so powerful, isn't it? To realize that you're not going mad again. It's not more what's going on with my brain. It's kind of really, this is a thing. And so maybe that helps you to manage it better. My kind of one of my over sort of arching bits of advice about food is real unprocessed, so yeah, maybe you do increase your carbohydrates. I mean, I've heard that said, but actually your body's asking for energy. It's not asking for carbohydrates. We don't know if our body's asking for which macro it's asking for. It's asking for more energy. So we could actually just get that by eating more of the foods which we know are, in your food plan.
Yeah, which is often for me when I tell my clients, I really like them to go and map out that luteal phase for them and say, this is a time where we might increase protein and increase fat.
Yeah, I love it, Clarissa. I was just thinking that, it's who says it has to be carbohydrates? I mean, I'm not saying it shouldn't be, but it depends who you are and what's happening for you. And, that's where that kind of this individualized approach and why it's so, so important that we treat the person sitting in front of us, not us or the last client we saw, but that person is really key. And I think, a lot of people kind of, you get that sort of, you hear people saying, oh, God, I just want to lie on the sofa and eat pizza, but, or whatever your kind of that food is that you're triggered to think of when you're hungry. So I think it's important to remember that it's not an excuse, or a reason to go for those foods. You never need those foods. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's just a great little let's just stick a pin in that. That is keep that at the top of feed that runs through your brain, guys, right? You don't actually know what macronutrient it is that your body is asking for, but it is asking for more. So it could just be more of the same of the things that already work for us, even if there is this voice inside of us or this compulsion or whatever it is to go for fill in the blank, whatever that might be. We actually don't need those things. Those are man-made things, recent man-made things when we think about all of history. So find the thing that actually works for you. So I'm really curious then to know, so what about for our clients who have started to move into perimenopause, maybe they're in menopause or post-menopause, what do we need to know about progesterone, estrogen, testosterone? What do we need to know about the dance of those hormones during those next phases of life?
Okay, so I'm going to actually start with menopause and what it is. Okay. So menopause is classed as that time when you have not had a period for a year. So you have stopped ovulating and you haven't ovulated, which will mean you haven't had a period for a year. And that can happen anytime. And again, these are rough ages because there's always, there'll always be people who sit outside of these, but kind of roughly between about the ages of 45 and 55, you'll see that you could go into your menopause. And then the period leading up to that, we call perimenopause, which is really just that kind of transitionary period between ovulating regularly and being fertile and not. So if you think about it, so if we go back to when we are, fertile and at that age as women where we can get pregnant. So when we're at that phase when, we can get pregnant, our ovaries are producing estrogen, progesterone, and testosterone every month. And like I said before, they are also produced in our adrenal glands by our fat cells, estrogen by our fat cells. But there's you'll see a drop, a decline in those hormones. And so you'll see associated kind of effects. So, we do start to see as women that maybe joints will get more achy and you start to experience vaginal dryness, maybe dryness in other parts of your body. Gosh, all sorts of things. What a big thing is a change in where your weight deposition as a woman. So when we have that estrogen that's being produced by our ovaries every month, body fat tends to be around our bottoms and our thighs, and our breasts and maybe our arms, those sorts of places. Post-menopause, you see a shift to that body fat starting to store more around your middle. And actually, it's really interesting that women have a kind of a certain degree of protection against cardiovascular disease and type 2 diabetes up until that point where they become postmenopausal because of estrogen. Estrogen makes us more sensitive to our own insulin. So it kind of, goes some way to preventing or reducing insulin resistance. So that's kind of the menopause, perimenopause things. And again, I think it's really important to stress here that it looks different in everybody. So we're hearing a lot of stories in the media at the moment, which again is brilliant because it raises awareness of this issue for women because there's a ton more research that needs to be done into this area as well. But some people have really quite symptom-free perimenopausal phases and then move into their menopausal part of life. They don't need to take any hormone replacement therapy and they're just fine. And other people really struggle. So I think around this kind of menopausal time, balance, again, is really, really important. And this is a time when you want to really start to think about. So I get lots of people coming to see me about this, and they'll be saying things like, the stuff that I've always done to, maybe regulate my body fat and to feel well and the way that I eat isn't working for me anymore. And I feel dreadful. I've got these awful hot flushes. I'm anxious. I've got terrible mood swings. I've got migraines, all these horrible symptoms, really heavy periods and then not one. And I don't know whether I'm coming or going. And that's the time in your life, I think, when you really do, it can be really beneficial to kind of have a bit of an audit of your diet and lifestyle and change it so that it suits what's happened to you now. Menopause is not a medical condition. It's a natural transition that we have always gone through as women. And it's really interesting how in some countries, you see that traditionally women don't suffer with the sorts of symptoms that perhaps we living in these countries where we're eating this kind of, the sad diet do struggle.
Yeah. And I guess for that, I would say, how does sugar change our hormonal axis? How is it a contributor to early puberty?
Yeah. Okay. So this one's really interesting. And so this is what I understand about what possibly is having an effect on this. I'm not sure we know 100%, and I'm not an expert in this field. I know enough to be able to help my clients. So first of all, sugar, raises insulin levels. We all know that, yeah? And we know that insulin is an appetite stimulant. Insulin makes us hungrier. And so the next thing that happens is you've got the impact that sugar has on a protein. You've got the impact that raised insulin has on a protein called sex hormone binding globulin, or SHBG for short. Okay, and SHBG is really important because it's this little protein which whizzes around our body and it binds to estrogen and testosterone. So it's absolutely about helping us to keep our hormones in balance. But if you've got chronically raised insulin levels because you are eating or drinking a diet that's full of sugar and refined starches, which is effectively sugar, your SHBG is going to be reduced. And so you could end up with more of these hormones whizzing around, which knocks your hormone balance out. So I think that could be part of what's going on with that sort of earlier puberty with children. You know, the stuff that's controlling estrogen is not working so well. So maybe there are high levels of estrogen. And I think the other thing is belly fat. So belly fat produces aromatase. Aromatase converts testosterone into estrogen. So perhaps, I don't know for sure, that's another way in which we end up with higher estrogen levels at a younger age in our girls. But I have to say, hands up, I don't know. I'm speculating.
Yeah, based on like just your understanding and, again, we're talking about clinical experience here, Mel. Like we know you're not like a researcher in this area, but from that clinical experience, I think about not only like early puberty, but then I think of things like polycystic ovarian syndrome, endometriosis, and does sugar, right, and insulin and all of that, does that play a role in impacting those hormones that then, you know what I mean? Like, how does that all play out? Do you have any sense of what's going on there at all?
I think yeah. So I think definitely sugar impacts them. I think via those two mechanisms I just described. I think also sugar's pro-inflammatory. We know that. So inflammation is also really contributing to this. And then, you go back to kind of maybe insulin resistance is starting so much earlier than it ever has done before. And we know that, you had Ben Bickman on here, didn't you? And, the three primary causes of insulin resistance are hyperinsulinemia, so chronically raised insulin, stress, and inflammation. I think, perhaps our children are more stressed than they've ever been before. I know for sure that, I've got a teenage daughter. And if you talk to them about kind of what their primary health concern is at the moment, it's anxiety and kind of, low mood. So I think stress is definitely playing a big role. And also, I think our kids are eating a diet that looks different to how it's ever looked before. How old am I? I'm in my 50s. I didn't eat like that. Food has changed out of all recognition, So, does that answer your question? Is that clearer?
Yeah, I think so. I think it's just, trying to kind of set the groundwork that, what we eat matters. And not that, and again, like, I know that not everybody who listens to this podcast, or maybe everybody who listens to this podcast maybe knows and understands that maybe they're listening to Food Junkies. Like they probably have some understanding that they have some sort of disordered relationship with food, whether it be from a chemical dependency standpoint, leading to that addiction side of things, or, something else going on. But I think it's really important to kind of understand that we are consuming things that are contributing to these metabolic disorders, hormonal disorders, whatever it might be. And so it helps to kind of set the, kind of lay the groundwork, because Clarissa asked like, how does sugar then impact this early puberty? Does then sugar, so not only does it then play out in these other kind of things that happen for people with a uterus, like PCOS, endometriosis, I'm wondering too, then does this, insulin resistance or high sugar levels, whatever it might be, does that also then play into early menopause or what people experience even in post-menopause?
I think undoubtedly it does. Yeah, because, insulin resistance effectively is kind of going to lead into your metabolic health not being what it should. And so, we know, don't we, that, if your metabolic health is off, it's dysregulated, kind of everything else in your body is not going to work as it should. You're going to, lose muscle mass. You're going to increase your fat mass. You're going to, your moods will be affected. We know that, raised sugar levels promote inflammation, that has an effect on brain health. Actually, there is something else which I haven't mentioned, which I think is really, really important and plays into this. And, kind of going back to when we were talking about the hormones, estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, the other thing is xenoestrogens. Okay, so xeno, foreign, estrogens, the stuff that's in our environment. And the things which, so effectively, what is a xenoestrogen? It's something which is not made by our body. It comes in from the outside. But what it does is it mimics our body's own natural estrogens, but it's way, way stronger. They have a much stronger effect than our body's own natural estrogen. So, that's definitely playing a part. And I think also with this kind of, we were talking about children and why they're, reaching puberty earlier, I think that's having a huge impact. I think it's also having an impact on how we move through that perimenopausal period and how we are as menopausal women. And what sources of xenoestrogens include plastics. Okay, everything's in plastic now, and pesticides sprayed on all of our foods, and preservatives in all of our foods, and air fresheners. Like, how many of us have got plugins in our house, or we're spraying stuff, or we're burning scented candles, perfume, personal care products, laundry products, hair dyes, nail polish. It's everywhere, and this stuff has an impact. And then, as I've talked about xenoestrogens, kind of feel like I also need to talk about phytoestrogens, because that can be a part of the answer. So phyto stands for plant, and their estrogen, their properties found in plants which mimic our body's estrogen but have a lesser kind of effect and can act as a really nice sort of balancing tool. So they can be useful post-menopause. They can be useful as you're transitioning into menopause to kind of help balance again. And you'll find those in soy, but, and this is really important, in traditional fermented soy products like tempeh and good tofu and things like that, not industrial soy products like yogurts and milks and fake meat and stuff like that. As they're also found in vegetables. So, broccoli, for example, can be really, really useful for kind of helping us to metabolize estrogen. And seeds. Seeds are a really great source. And actually there's, seed cycling can be a useful tool from a sort of a no harm approach to help perhaps balance hormones as well.
Hey, Food Junkies listeners. We're just going to take a quick break here to share with you something our team thinks could help benefit your recovery with food, body, or self. Thank you again for listening.
Hey, Food Junkie listeners. Have you read the book Food Junkies: Recovery from Food Addiction yet? It all starts there. This is the book with the basic theory and clinical knowledge of food addiction. Read this book first to get the basics. Our Food Junkies podcast jumps off from the book and is the ongoing, breathing version, ever growing and ever expanding. Our podcast introduces you to all the issues of food addiction and the who's who of food addiction today. And if we at the Food Junkies podcast have inspired you to action, either to quit sugar or some other triggering foods or behavior, and you need some extra support, then please join the free Facebook group, I'm Sweet Enough, Sugar Free for Life. There you will find a community of people who come from all parts of the spectrum, from the new and just starting out, to the long-timers who call themselves food addicts in recovery, to counselors ready to give back and help you. The Facebook group even offers free support Zoom groups. Basically, it's a great online living resource of food addiction to help you stay sugar-free for life. So please join us.
Now back to the show. If you have enjoyed this episode, please let us know. We love to hear from you. Kindly leave us a review on whatever platform you listen to our podcast on. We love getting feedback from our listeners. Can you tell us a little bit more about cortisol? Because I know it's a stress hormone, and I know we definitely all are affected by it, but how does it affect our health and appetite?
Okay, so I think that there are a few things to talk about here. It's really, really important. So cortisol, stress hormone. Our adrenal glands sit on top of our kidneys, and they're where cortisol is produced, and they're also what produce estrogen and testosterone. So we really need to look after them. We live in stressful, so many of us kind of have chronic stress going on in our lives all the time. And so it's really important. They are a system, an organ, which is really, really important for us to support and something I often look at with my clients. But let's just go back to the kind of that interplay that cortisol, stress, insulin have. So cortisol's released in response to stress. And then the body, in terms of its stress response, will start to release sugars into your bloodstream. Okay, so stored glycogen comes back out, and so you end up with your bloodstream full of glucose, which is great when you're going to run away, for your life, and you're going to use that up. But, when you're sitting behind your desk and someone's being horrible to you, or you're worrying about paying the bills, or you're sat in a traffic jam, or your kids are stressed out at school, or, all the stuff that we get stressed about, and the exact same stress response happens, doesn't matter what's causing the stress, we end up with these really raised blood sugar levels. So in the entire blood volume in our bodies, there should never be more than sort of between about 4 and 5 grams of sugar at any one time. It's really, really strictly controlled because sugar is toxic to, our organs. That's why type 2 diabetes is such a horrible disease, because it damages literally everything. So, our body knows this, has really tight controls. That's what insulin is. One of, insulin's major jobs is to get that sugar packaged away into the cells where it can be stored or turned into fat. Any excess sugar gets turned into fat by insulin and then stored away nice and safely so our body's not getting damaged. So just to go back, raised cortisol equals raised blood sugar, which leads to raised insulin levels. Raised insulin levels chronically cause insulin resistance. Vicious circle. Insulin resistance then means that more insulin is required to do the same job as before you got insulin resistance. A much smaller amount was needed for. And then you end up with this kind of vicious cycle where it just, if you don't change something, diet and lifestyle factors, it just continues to get worse and worse. So, yeah.
Absolutely. So just out of curiosity, because I feel like I hear this all the time, like raised cortisol, raised sugar, right? Like how it all plays out. And people are always talking about raised cortisol. Like, are there any quick, indications that I could be looking for that might tell me, hey, Molly, your cortisol's a little high. Maybe you should do something to bring that level down. Like, how might I know in the day-to-day? Is there anything I should be looking for?
To be honest, I can't think of anything that's non-testy, but there is a brilliant test that I use quite often with clients called the Dutch test. And it looks at dried urine. So you collect 5 samples and you send them back to the lab, and they can see from that what your cortisol levels are. And they measure them, so you'll do the 5 different times. And so they can see what your cortisol levels are through the day. They also measure all 3 different estrogens, because we don't have just one estrogen, we have 3 different types. So it measures all of them, the testosterone, the DHA levels, the DHEA levels, progesterone levels. Yeah, that's what I'd use. I can't think of anything else.
And once you do that test, like let's say somebody's listening to this and they reach out to their naturopath or they buy a Dutch test or whatever, does that company then, or are there guidelines or recommendations of what to do if they fall outside of normal levels? Do they kind of give them a to-do list, so to speak?
Yeah, for sure. So you would only be able to do that through a practitioner. So a really good thing would be to look for a functional medicine practitioner, or, perhaps a hormone specialist, and they would be able to guide you. They'd be able to interpret the test results for you, because it comes back and it's complex. So you'd need somebody who could interpret those test results for you and then make them make sense to you and fit your life. And yeah, absolutely, Molly, give you the advice that you need to help lower those cortisol levels. It's really interesting. I heard Dr. Elizabeth Boham talking about hormone levels and sort of things that can help around this. And she was saying that 15 minutes meditation twice a day significantly reduces hot flashes in women who are having them. So mindfulness techniques are so powerful, and that can be all sorts of things, can't it? A yoga practice. Not everybody gets on with meditation. It's really interesting. I was talking to a psychologist the other day, and he was saying that actually he gets more anxious when he tries to meditate. because he kind of needs to do something. He's, maybe more of a sort of a kinesthetic person. So he has a practice that he does a little bit like yoga that he finds much more effective. So again, it's not that one size fits all. Everyone's talking about meditation doesn't work for everybody, but find what works for you. That can be so, so important. Yeah. But the other thing that really impacts cortisol levels, of course, is poor sleep. So, if you're not sleeping well, that raises your cortisol levels, and then that raises ghrelin levels, which is your hunger hormone. So it's kind of all of this, isn't it? And realizing how it all
is interconnected, right? It's all a part of the same. And so I'm wondering, like, when it comes to GI issues or bowel movements or constipation, like, how does that affect our hormones?
So constipation actually can really impact hormone levels. And it's something which isn't discussed enough because so many people are constipated. And it's one of those things that people are often a little bit embarrassed to talk about. And it's also really difficult to treat. Constipation can be a really difficult thing to help people with, but it is very treatable. So what happens is our hormones are removed from our body. When we don't need them anymore, they are removed via our liver. So our liver detoxifies them. And as a part of that detoxification process, something called conjugation happens, which is just a posh word for joining something to something else. So the hormone gets joined to a substance which makes it inactive. And then that's all hunky-dory, and it should be excreted in your stool and leave your body. Job done. But in someone who's constipated, there are these little bugs which can be, one of which is called beta-glucuronidase. There are other types, but depending on what's going on in your gut microbiome and how balanced it is, you might find that you have very high levels of this beta-glucuronidase. And what that does is it comes along and it uncouples the hormone from the thing which was making it inactive. Hormone now active again, back into circulation, messes up hormone levels. So that's one of the ways in which constipation can really play a part in, hormone imbalances. Absolutely. Yeah. And moving on from there. So ensuring that your gut microbiome is healthy. So getting enough fiber in your diet, and fiber doesn't have to come from whole grains. Fiber can come from, soluble fiber. Vegetables are a lovely source of fiber. Fruit. I know you're a fan of apples, Clarissa. I love, apples are a great, lovely, gentle source of fiber. Because one of the problems with fiber sometimes is that people who perhaps have very sensitive guts, or perhaps they have an imbalanced kind of microbial community in there already, suddenly upping your fiber can cause some, it increases gas. It can cause
bloating, all of that kind of.
Yeah. So it's something you want to do gradually and gently and kind of with a little bit of sort of knowledge behind it. Totally. And then the other thing which is really important is supporting liver function. You can do that with foods. So beetroot's great for supporting liver function, getting enough protein, sulfurous vegetables, so onion and garlic and leeks, things like broccoli and cauliflower. They're all really great. Eggs are really great for liver function. You don't have to go on some weird detox thing to have your liver being healthy. It just needs the fuels that it needs to work properly. And also some really great supplements around that can help with that. Things like milk thistle can be really useful. So yeah, just looking at the sort of systems which are important to support in terms of, an overall approach, this kind of lovely holistic approach to looking after our health and hormone balance.
You would say that you're probably more on team feed, like the microbiome, than team starve, right?
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, good to know.
And you know what, Clarissa, it's really interesting. So when I qualified, we came out as nutritional therapists and we were taught that, if we ever, say we did a stool test or we suspect, okay, so the gut microbiome it works in a commensal way. So, you have all these different little populations. It's like a big city full of lots of different people down there, and they kind of all balance each other out. It's that balance word again. But sometimes, for all sorts of reasons, stress, or you've had antibiotics, or, lots of things, that can get imbalanced. So then a population which was before held in check, and a good example is yeast, for example, can just grow out of control, because what was controlling it's gone because it got killed off by the antibiotics or something else. And so, yeah, we were taught to kill it, use things like oregano oil and, stuff like this, kill the bad stuff. But it's much more about crowding it out now. So grow the good stuff and get it back. So the goodies crowd out the not so goodies. Yeah.
That's exciting to hear that, again, I think the gut microbiome stuff is still fairly new. It's still like in its infancy, if you will, as far as, research and understanding goes. Although Clarissa and I know that like what clinically shows up many years, right? Like, it long before they actually can quote unquote prove it with the research. Yeah. But I like that it's all kind of coming along though. And like you're understanding it's not about getting rid of one or the other. It's that balance piece. So it's about crowding out or making it so that the healthy ones that you want to have are, doing their job and keeping the other ones in control, but that there is some need for the other ones or they wouldn't be there. And so, just understanding and respecting that there is something going on internally that, again, it goes back to like what we're putting into our body. So I'm thinking about that and I'm thinking about all the different hormones we've talked about today. And I was wondering, what is your understanding of how we can use this information or better understanding of hormones to help us treat food addiction? Because that's what we primarily do, Clarissa and I. And we're always kind of, selfish in wanting to know how can we help our clients a little more or differently based on this information.
So I think it comes back again to that kind of, knowledge is power, or knowledge can be power, or empowering maybe, so maybe it's the piece about when somebody feels like, they're sticking to all the stuff that they've learned they have to do to control those horrible cravings and find that sort of sense of peace and freedom. And then once a month, it all goes pear-shaped. Like, what the heck is going on? And so if you then, as their practitioners, can reassure them and explain to them what's happening, I think there is huge power in realizing that it's not in your head, it's something which is happening. And then past that, next explain that, yes, those thoughts probably are coming up now because of the learned behaviors and those pathways in our brain which have learned that, when we're hungry, this is what we want. We're really hungry, this is what we want. That actually we still have to not listen to those, because it's still about real food. It's still about increasing energy intake. Like, forget the calories and the, all that weird stuff, which is our body's asking for more energy because it's busy. It's doing some really important stuff. So let's feed it. And I love that word, feed. And also I really love when you just said, Molly, about respecting. So I think there's a big, big part there, isn't there? It's let's stop. I think the other thing is it feels like maybe with that knowledge, we can start to work with our bodies instead of fighting against them the whole time. So much advice these days feels like this fight constantly. And my hope is it doesn't have to be like that. It's hard. Sometimes it's hard to find it, but I don't think it has to be like that. I think you can find it.
Yeah. And it just feels so much more loving to say like, hey, my body right now is kind of a fat burning machine. So I'm going to like set it up for success with some protein and fat. And I'm going to enjoy this real food. And it feels so good for me instead of like a punishment or, oh, I can't believe I'm having these cravings. Like, yeah, I just know that during my luteal phase, I need to have like the best meals planned and I'm going to enjoy them all to the max.
Yeah, totally. And also, if I don't feel like going for my normal run or doing my normal exercise routine because I just haven't got as much energy, I'm going to respect that too. I'm going to rest, because I don't rest enough either, do we? Rest
no, it's so true. And that's self-care, 100%.
Yeah.
So where can our listeners find you, Mel?
Okay, so I am at melmartinnutrition.com. So I have a website. And then, I offer a free chat, with anybody who's interested in learning more about how I might be able to help them. And so, and I'm not I'm really generous with that time because I think it's really, really important to get that opportunity to speak to people and answer any questions. And, it's complete no obligation. Sometimes people choose to work with me, sometimes they don't, and that's cool. I love to talk to people. So yeah, that's the best way to get in touch with me if you want to.
All right. And we have a signature question, and it would be, if you could tell a younger version of yourself something about sugar, food addiction, and or hormones, what would it be?
Okay, so I've gone deep and honest here because these are the two pieces that I think are really important, right? So I think this whole thing is not just about the physiology and it's not just about the psychology, it's about the two together. So I would tell my younger self that her deep sense of shame, feeling of unworthiness, and deep-seated beliefs that she was unlovable wasn't hers. It was her mother's stuff. And then after that, I'd tell her to stop eating grains straight away because, oh my goodness, if I could have known that years ago, it would have saved me years of struggle. So yeah, that's what I would
Awesome. Thank you so much for being here today with us, Mel. It's been so honestly eye-opening for me. I thought I knew enough about hormones, but now you have just tapped into so much more.
Oh, well, thank you both so much for having me. It's been a pleasure. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, Mel.
Thanks for joining us this week on Food Junkies, Recovery from Food Addiction. Make sure to join our Facebook group, Sugar Free for Life support group, I'm Sweet Enough. You can subscribe to our show in iTunes or Stitchers. That way you'll never miss an episode. While you're at it, if you found value in this show, we'd appreciate a rating on iTunes. Or if you'd simply tell a friend about the show, that would help us out too. Don't forget to pick up your copy of Dr. Tarman's book, Food Junkies, which is available on Amazon. If you have any additional questions, both Molly and Clarissa are food addiction professionals and work one-on-one with clients. You can find their websites and email addresses in the show notes. Be sure to tune in every Friday when our new episodes drop. As Vera loves to say, the power is ours.